Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a medieval street fair, somewhere between the year 1270 and your last weird food craving. The air smells like roasted hazelnuts and sizzling onions. There's a cow somewhere to your left, mooing disapprovingly as you navigate the cobblestones. You sidestep a puddle you hope is just spilled cider, and suddenly, bam, a tray of candied almonds is under your nose. You're hungry. And in medieval Europe, that's a dangerous thing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your current location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when folks are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first stop is the vendor with sticky fingers and an even stickier tray. He's selling honey cakes, soft golden rounds made of rye flour and boiled honey, patted together with hands that look like they've never met a bar of soap. Still, the cakes are warm, sweet, a little smoky. You hand over a coin, hoping the stickiness is from sugar and not something else. The fairground is packed. You hear a woman shouting about fig and almond pockets, essentially medieval Pop-Tarts, minus the branding and with a much higher chance of insect protein. A barefoot boy darts past you, snatching one from her tray and disappearing into the crowd like a sugared-up ghost. She curses at him in a mix of Latin and local dialect, but it's half-hearted. Stealing snacks was practically a sport. You pause at a booth where a man in a straw hat fries cheese and animal fat. The scent hits like a freight cart, greasy, sour, slightly majestic. He flips the melted rectangles with a knife that looks more like a short sword. You buy one. It burns your tongue. It's worth it. People didn't really snack between meals in the modern sense. Meals themselves were smaller, stretched between labor and prayer bells. But fairs, festivals, and market days were snack central, especially for the poor, who might not see meat or fine pastry outside these events. You spot another treat, roasted chickpeas tossed in salt and cumin. That one might have come from Spain, or farther. Historians still argue whether certain spices in the region were already common by the 12th century, or if traders exaggerated their wares. Next to that, a woman with an impressive mustache, don't ask, sells her version of apple fritters. They're actually quince, roughly chopped, deep-fried, drenched in honey. You buy one and feel your teeth ache. It's glorious. The noise rises as you walk, jingling bells, clanging cups, sheep arguing with goats. One enterprising vendor carries a tray of sweets balanced on his head while singing about his flourless miracle biscuits. Spoiler, they're mostly flour. A moment later, you pass a nobleman's child, hair perfectly curled, robes far too clean, licking what appears to be a piece of hardened syrup on a stick. A primitive lollipop. His governess glares at you like you might sneeze peasant germs on her charge. Near the far end of the square, you find a humble stall with no sign, no shouting, just a small older woman wrapping something in clean linen. She offers it silently. You unwrap it to find dried pear slices, sprinkled with sugar and herbs, subtle, elegant, possibly magical. She smiles, revealing gold teeth. You decide not to ask questions. Snack stalls like this flourished around feast days and holy fairs, when indulgence was, briefly, allowed. Church doctrine usually frowned on gluttony, but even bishops couldn't resist fried cheese. One curious thing, much of the junk food sold in markets back then walked a fine legal line. Indie street pies were notorious for containing meat-like substances. Horse? Rat? Yesterday's leftovers? No one asked, especially if it came with gravy. There's also a matter of ingredients. Sugar was a luxury item, imported and expensive. So most medieval sweets were sweetened with honey, dried fruits, or even sweet wine. Still, you'll spot a few nobles snacking on candied violets or sugar-dusted almonds, delicacies that cost more than a blacksmith's week of wages. In one corner, you spy a beggar selling roasted wheat kernels, tossed with bacon drippings and salt. Poor man's snack mix. He calls it field crumble. You toss him a coin, partly out of curiosity, partly guilt. He hands you a warm paper cone. It's surprisingly good. The sun is setting now, casting a golden glow across the marketplace. You lean against a post, mouth sticky, purse lighter, wondering how your stomach still has room for more. Somewhere in the crowd, someone drops a tray of custard tarts. A small riot breaks out. You don't join it. Yet. You've barely digested the honey cakes and roasted chickpeas, and yet something compels you forward. A smell, maybe. Grease, garlic, onions. You follow the scent like a hound on a trail and find yourself standing in front of a large iron pan sizzling over an open flame. A woman in a soot-streaked apron flips a fritter the size of your face. This, dear traveler, is deep-fried joy, or danger, possibly both. The woman beckons with a crooked finger and hands you a flat, golden circle, crispy on the outside, mushy in the middle. It's filled with leeks, herbs, and... Wait, is that fish? She winks. You take a bite anyway. It's not bad. A little swampy, maybe, but satisfying in that I haven't eaten since sunrise kind of way. You're in the world of forbidden delights now. Frying food wasn't always smiled upon in medieval society. In some towns, fry shops were banned during Lent, suspected of enticing good Christians into gluttony, and in others, vendors were fined for overstinking the street with their bubbling vats of oil. Yet people still lined up for them. There's a reason. Fried snacks didn't just taste good, they were filling, portable, and affordable. You didn't need a fork or fancy manners. You just needed 2 fingers and a mild disregard for digestive consequences. You walk a little farther and come upon a boy selling black pudding tarts. No, not chocolate. This is medieval street slang for blood sausage wrapped in pastry. He offers you one on a leaf. It's warm, spiced, and challenging. You chew slowly, giving your taste buds a chance to negotiate. Street pies were one of the most common snack foods sold in medieval cities. They came in hundreds of variations: meat pies, fish pies, fruit pies. Some were savory, others sweet. Most were handheld, with hard crusts meant more for portability than palatability. The crust, known as a coffin, often doubled as a disposable dish. You could eat it, but most people didn't. You give it a try. Crunchy, bland, possibly 30% ash. You discreetly feed it to a nearby goose. One old man you pass is frying up bits of tripe. He boasts that it's been boiled, soaked, spiced, and refried for maximum chew. You believe him. A single bite has the texture of a medieval shoe. Still, the flavors, interesting. Smoky, earthy, with a hint of regret. Some vendors hawk pastries filled with dried figs and nuts, fried until the edges curl like autumn leaves. Others serve battered onions, sizzling in animal fat. The concept of the deep-fried snack crosses social classes, though the ingredients shift depending on your coin purse. A peasant gets turnip fritters. A merchant's wife might splurge on a fried almond and rose petal dumpling. Historians still argue whether some of these recipes were local inventions or borrowed from Arabic or Jewish culinary traditions. Trade routes were alive and well, especially in places like Sicily and Spain, where Moorish cooking had a massive influence. That sweet-salty combo you love today? Medieval cooks were already mastering it centuries ago. Honey-glazed meats, fried dates stuffed with cheese, pastries that somehow balanced cinnamon and beef. You pause at a woman's stall where she's skewering dough spirals and dunking them in a cauldron of oil. They emerge crisp, golden, and surprisingly modern-looking. You sprinkle one with ground sugar and take a bite. It crunches delicately, dissolving into warm sweetness. She calls them crisples. You call them dangerously good. Nearby, a young man peddles what he calls Lenten treats, fried dough balls filled with peas and herbs. Technically vegan, technically delicious. You grab 2 because moderation is for people with fewer options. There's one booth you're advised to avoid, known simply as the eel place. But curiosity overcomes you. You approach, nose first. The fryer sizzles with long, slender bits that look like someone's shoelaces got away. The cook hands you a small, crispy eel fritter and shrugs. You take a nibble. It's surprisingly tender. Fishy, yes, but flavorful. You nod in approval. He grins toothlessly. Frying pans were a prized possession in the medieval kitchen, heavy, often passed down through generations. Street vendors used oversized pans balanced over coals or open fire pits, usually outside city taverns or near market churches where foot traffic was thick and morals were loose. In one corner, a man recites a bawdy rhyme while flipping onion and mint fritters with a dagger. He rhymes fritter with something deeply unrepeatable. A small crowd laughs, and someone buys a round for their friends. Ride snacks were social food, eaten in groups, on the move, between gossip and haggling and the occasional fistfight over the last dumpling. You munch another fritter, this one filled with cheese and something vaguely sweet, and realize you've lost track of how many you've eaten. But that's the thing with medieval junk food. It wasn't just about hunger, it was about pleasure, indulgence. Brief, greasy moments of escape in a world of rules, mud, and unexpected plague outbreaks. The frying continues into the evening. Oil bubbles, voices rise, and your fingertips glisten with crumbs and spice. Somewhere in the crowd, someone shouts about fried cow brains being back in stock. You decide that's your cue to slow down. You find yourself wandering down a quieter alley now, away from the chaos of bubbling oil and rhyming vendors. A chill hangs in the air and the scent changes, less fried, more fermented. Funky, earthy, undeniably dairy. Congratulations, you've stumbled into cheese country. Not a region, mind you, a state of being. On one wooden cart sits a mound of cheeses, round, square, veiny, cracked, oozing slightly, and all proudly displayed without a single covering cloth. The merchant, a grizzled man with one eyebrow and zero patience, cuts off a wedge and hands it to you. It's a soft cheese, maybe sheep's milk, maybe cow, maybe something that used to moo and is now thriving in retirement. You bite in. It's sharp, creamy, and alarmingly tangy. You try not to make a face. He nods approvingly. Cheese was one of medieval Europe's most accessible snack foods, easy to carry, protein-rich, and, if aged long enough, immune to further spoilage. For travelers, farmers, and pilgrims, cheese was life. But that doesn't mean all cheese was legal. See, some cities imposed strict regulations on cheese vendors. In 13th century London, for example, you could be fined, or even imprisoned for selling unlicensed cheese, or cheese deemed unfit for Christian mouths, which is either poetic or terrifying, depending on your lactose tolerance. You sample another, a hard, crumbly number wrapped in dried leaves and aged in a cave. The merchant calls it traveling monk's rind. You ask if it's named after a particular monk. He just winks. You decide not to ask again. Illicit cheese smuggling was, believe it or not, a thing, especially in places like France and the Low Countries, where regional monopolies on certain dairies sparked under-the-table trade. Traveling merchants would hide wheels of cheese under their cloaks, in hay bales, or sewn into saddlebags, anything to dodge taxation. It wasn't glamorous, but for the right brie, some folks risked excommunication. You chew on a surprisingly sweet cheese flecked with herbs and honey, dessert cheese. It crumbles like shortbread and melts on your tongue. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays. A child throws a rind at it. This feels oddly holy. In monasteries, cheese wasn't just food, it was a point of pride. Monks experimented with bacteria and aging techniques long before modern science caught up. They aged wheels for years, flipped them weekly, and anointed them with beer or wine. In one case, monks aged cheese by wrapping it in damp straw and hiding it under floorboards. Yes, it's gross. Yes, it worked. Historians still argue whether blue cheese was discovered intentionally or by accident. Legend has it that a distracted shepherd left his bread and cheese in a cave and came back weeks later to find it infused with blue-green veins. Risky bite? Maybe. But medieval logic said, if it smells bad, but no one died last time, it's probably fine. Cheese had social status too. Richer folks dined on fresh cheese with figs and nuts, while the poor got crumbly, salty curds or dry scraps sold by weight. Some cheeses were so dry they had to be soaked in wine before eating, like rehydrating a medieval sponge snack. You wander further and encounter a man slicing a bright orange, cheese with a crust that crunches like old bark. He insists it's medicinal. Good for stomach worms, he says. You politely pass. There's also a softer cheese being sold in little ceramic pots. It's spiced with cloves and garlic and looks like something scraped off a cathedral wall, but the flavor is surprisingly smooth, almost luxurious. You dip a stale bit of bread in. There's a small moment of peace. In some places, cheese had religious associations. During fasting seasons, monks used special cheese loopholes, arguing that since cheese came from animals but wasn't meat, it was allowed. Other times, the rules tightened. The Council of Cluny once banned cheese during Lent, only to reverse the ban a few decades later, possibly after the abbot got hangry. You pause beside a group of children chewing something tough. Turns out it's hard cheese crusts dipped in vinegar. A poor man's sour candy. One girl offers you a piece, eyes sparkling with mischief. You chew it slowly, nodding with grave approval. She grins and runs off with the rest. As you leave the alley, a final vendor calls out, "Cheese puffs!" You're intrigued. Turns out it's not what you think. It's a small bread roll stuffed with soft cheese, baked, then fried, because why stop at one method of preparation when you can try 3? You take a bite. It's warm, chewy, and bursts with buttery saltiness. You sigh. This might be the pinnacle of medieval snacking. But just as you're about to buy another, a guard wanders by. The vendor hides his tray under a cloth. Apparently, he hasn't paid the cheese tax this week. You slip away before anyone asks questions. Behind you, the alley returns to stillness, just the scent of aged dairy lingering in the air. You're wiping cheese grease off your fingertips with a scrap of linen that smells faintly like lavender and goat. The sun is lower now, and the glow for taverns and stalls starts to flicker across the cobblestones. That's when you notice something odd. There's a boy balancing a tray with both hands, and on that tray are pastries, brown, sticky, steaming slightly. But here's the twist. They smell like ale. You follow, nose first, until you're inside a low-roofed tavern where the candles flicker from breath alone. The room hums with quiet laughter and a few musicians softly scraping fiddles near the back. A woman with a large wooden spoon offers you a sample of what she proudly calls ale pies. You chew, sweet, malty. The crust is soft but chewy, infused with beer so clearly it's almost boozy. A tipsy tart. She tells you it was baked with dark ale, dried apples, and a splash of mead. You blink. This is breakfast for drunks meets bedtime treat. In the Middle Ages, alcohol wasn't just for drinking. It was also a staple in cooking, even for sweet foods. Ale softened hard grains. Wine preserved fruit. Mead added a floral sweetness to things that otherwise tasted like boiled sadness. Some bakers even soaked their flour in ale before mixing it into dough. The result? A pastry with tang and bite, slightly fizzy if you timed it right. In wealthier towns, people added rosewater, aniseed, or even imported citrus peel soaked in brandy. You try a tart filled with raisins rehydrated in claret wine and wonder how this never made it into modern grocery aisles. Next to the bar, a burly man offers you sops. These are hunks of stale bread soaked in mulled wine or sweetened beer, and then fried into something vaguely resembling French toast's grungier cousin. You bite into one. It's heavy, warm, and might stick to your ribs for a week. He grins. Good for the winter, he says. You believe him. At another table, a traveling monk shares a recipe from the Rhineland. Honey wine custard baked into a rye shell. He says it's served during saints' feasts. You ask which saint. He waves vaguely and mumbles something about Saint Bernard of B. Utter. You don't question it. Historians still argue whether alcohol-laced desserts were everyday fare or reserved for festivals. Some recipes survive in monastery cookbooks, carefully noted with margins full of warnings like boils over fast and do not use sour ale unless punishing novices. You sip a spiced mead while chewing on something called a puffball. It's a doughy pastry soaked in wine and topped with sugar and crushed hazelnuts. The woman who made it calls it the Queen's Midnight Feast. She also hints that it helps with digestion and emotional clarity, which you suspect means it gets people chatty. There's a group of elderly women dipping fried dough into mulled wine, gossiping about someone's 5th marriage. One passes you a nugget of crust dipped in honeyed ale. It's like a donut and a nightcap in one. Not all of these treats were for the common folk, though. Royal courts had entire kitchens devoted to sweetened delicacies, especially during holidays. In one record, King Richard II's court served hypocras tarts, pastries soaked in spiced wine and sprinkled with gold leaf. You won't be seeing those in this tavern, but you do spot a pie that glimmers suspiciously. The baker winks and whispers, "Ground tin flakes, just a little sparkle." You pretend not to hear that part. Suddenly, someone brings out ale jelly. It jiggles ominously on a pewter plate, made by boiling down ale and adding isinglass, a gelatin from fish bladders. Don't dwell on it. It sets into a wobbly, boozy dessert. You try a spoonful. It's cold, bittersweet, and oddly invigorating, also possibly cursed. At the hearth, a pot simmers with what's called posset, a warm drink of spiced milk curdled with ale, thickened with eggs, and sometimes eaten with a spoon like pudding. It smells like cloves and bedtime. You're handed a wooden bowl and warned to drink it slowly. You do. It tastes like medieval NyQuil in the best way. Some of the locals snicker when a young squire stumbles in and orders 3 cherry tarts soaked in mead. His friends tease him, saying he can't handle dessert drink. He bites into one defiantly and immediately goes glassy-eyed. You make a note to pace yourself. As you leave the tavern, someone presses a bundle into your hands. Little pastries wrapped in cloth, sweetened with ale-macerated raisins and dusted with sugar. "For the road," they say. The night air feels colder now, but your stomach is warm, your hands sticky, and your breath smells faintly of yeast and spice. You pass a barrel labeled honey wine turnovers. Don't ask what's in them, and decide not to tempt fate. The wind picks up as you step away from the tavern glow, and you hug your bundle of ale-soaked pastries a little closer. The streets are quieter now, just the occasional dog barking at nothing, and a blacksmith still hammering stubbornly into the night. As you meander toward a flickering torch-lit alley, you spot something small and pyramid-shaped glinting on a merchant's table. At first glance, it looks like a precious gem, but as you get closer, the truth hits your nostrils. This is sugar. Not the granulated stuff you dump in tea. No, this is medieval sugar. Dense, dark, and expensive. A tightly packed loaf, more like a brick or conical tower, sometimes sold in shards that had to be chipped off with a knife. The merchant, dressed more like a physician than a baker, holds up a piece of what he calls sucket. It's essentially preserved fruit rolled in sugar and spiced with cinnamon. You taste one. It's intensely sweet, chewy, and makes your teeth buzz in a way you're not sure is natural. In medieval Europe, sugar wasn't just rare. It was classified as a spice. That meant it was sold by apothecaries, not grocers. Most folks only saw sugar during major feasts or funerals of the well-connected, where candied almonds and sugar-coated anise seeds were given out as tokens. You marvel at how this small, crystalline luxury traveled, harvested on plantations in Cyprus, Sicily, or the Levant, shipped across oceans, taxed by every noble within sniffing distance, and then finally ground, boiled, and congealed into treats like marzipan and ginger pastes. By the time it reached your hands, it had passed through more borders than some monarchs. Historians still argue whether medieval Europe's sugar craze started with the Crusades or earlier Arab trading links. But one thing is clear. Once people tasted it, they wanted more, and more, and more. Even the clergy got in on the trend. Some monasteries began experimenting with sugar syrups to preserve fruits for holy day feasts. Others claimed sugar helped with digestion or melancholy. One monk's recipe combined boiled sugar, mint, fennel, and rose petals. Another wrote about sugar plums meant to gladden the heart and sweeten the breath. You're not sure which part you just bit into, but your breath now smells like herbal toothpaste, so success? One vendor you pass offers candied ginger strips wrapped in fig leaves. He says they help ward off stomach demons. You raise an eyebrow. He nods solemnly. You eat one anyway. It burns a little. It also might work. Then there's the drageie stand. Tiny sugar-coated seeds or nuts, rolled over and over in a pan until they turn glossy and white. They're sold by the handful, and a small girl offers you a pouch filled with what she calls dream beads. You pop one in your mouth. It's aniseed, strong, sweet, makes your tongue tingle. You keep chewing. There's something magical about these sweets, not just their taste, but their role in society. Sugar wasn't for children, at least not primarily. It was medicine, status, and art. Nobles displayed sugar sculptures during feasts, castles, biikas, irds, even miniature scenes of battle. By the end of the night, guests were invited to break off pieces and eat the sugary drama. You pass by a more humble scene now. A mother melting sugar over coals to make hard candy drops, poured carefully into carved wooden molds. Her son helps fan the fire while her daughter sprinkles herbs into the mixture. When cooled, they pop out the little shapes and wrap them in waxy cloth. You buy a clove-flavored star. It's strong, oddly savory, and clings to your teeth with stubborn joy. In smaller towns, sweets like this were often made at home, if at all. Most families sweetened things with honey, fruit paste, or reduced grape syrup known as defrutum. You try a cake made with dried plums and a thick dollop of defrutum. It's sticky, tangy, and oddly familiar, like an ancient cousin of fig Newtons. Some of the richer sweetmakers used imported ingredients like saffron, musk, or even crushed pearls, though whether those were genuinely palatable or just flexing their wealth is up for debate. You pause at a grander stall where a man in a red hat sells snow. It's not real snow. It's a whipped dessert made from milk, sugar, and rosewater, served chilled in pewter cups. You sip it slowly. It tastes like floral marshmallows and medieval overindulgence. He offers you a second variety, flavored with violets and something he calls unicorn's breath. You raise an eyebrow again. He leans in and whispers, "Just lavender and goat milk." You nod. Somehow that's more comforting than the alternative. As you leave the stall, he hands you a sugar figurine shaped like a swan. It's hollow, brittle, and melts in your mouth like crystalline poetry. You feel a little like royalty, and a little like a 6-year-old with sticky fingers. By now your stomach protests. Your pockets are dusted with sugar, your teeth coated in syrup. The stars above twinkle like candied almonds, and the moon seems just slightly glazed. You walk slowly, past barrels of sugared nuts, past bees buzzing lazily, around an open honey pot and back into the quiet curve of the night. You're full. You know you're full. And yet, what's that? A deliciously charred smell, warm and meaty, wafting from just beyond a torchlit curve in the street. You follow it with mild shame and zero resistance. There's a fire pit in the center of the square, and around it, a circle of vendors turning skewers over open flames. They call it meat on a stick. You call it destiny. A boy holds out a piece of roasted lark threaded onto a sharpened twig. You take it without hesitation. It's smoky, tender, and just salty enough to awaken every snack receptor still surviving in your stomach. Meat on a stick wasn't just a street food gimmick. It was practical, popular, and portable. Soldiers loved it. Travelers loved it. Even minor nobles gnawed on them during hunts. You chew slowly, bones crackling, juice dripping. One of the vendors offers you a bowl to spit out the bits. How civilized. Next comes a skewer of liver, charred, spiced, and wrapped in something green and slightly fuzzy. You're assured it's wild mint, though you suspect it's more like whatever was growing next to the ditch. You take a bite anyway. It's shockingly delicious. Another tray passes your nose. Cubes of boar, glistening with honey and vinegar, nestled between slices of roasted apple. You don't even bother asking what it's called. You just take one. It burns your fingers. You blow gently and bite. Historians still argue whether skewered street meats originated independently across regions or were inspired by trade with the Middle East, where kebabs were already a thing. What's certain is that by the 14th century, meat sticks had gone medieval mainstream. Some even came with flair. You spot a man spinning his skewer like a drumstick before handing it off. The woman beside him has turned her grilled squirrel into something resin. Bling a bouquet, each piece layered with toasted breadcrumbs and a sprig of rosemary. Presentation matters, apparently. Not all meats were noble. Plenty of stalls offered mystery skewers, chewy, gristly, and somewhat alarming. You eye one that might be pigeon, or rat, or both. The vendor shrugs. City meat, he says, as if that clarifies anything. You decide to pass. But there's more than just birds and boar. A Moorish traveler in bright robes sells seasoned lamb skewers with saffron and dried apricot. He smiles gently and calls them sweet swords. You take one. The blend of spice and char makes your eyes close involuntarily. You tip him double. Near the back, there's a woman offering fish on sticks. Tiny river fish, grilled whole and basted in garlic oil. You try one, and the crunch is surprisingly satisfying. The bones tickle your tongue, but you chew through them like a medieval connoisseur. She nods at you like you've passed a test. Further on, a group of children is gathered around a fire, roasting what looks like meatballs stuck on branches. Turns out, it's chopped chicken scraps mixed with stale bread and herbs, shaped into lumps and seared over flame. Budget-friendly, peasant-approved. You join them for a bite and end up staying for 3. Suddenly, the crowd parts to reveal a performer, juggling skewers still hot from the grill. He catches one midair, takes a bite, and keeps juggling. A cheer erupts. You applaud with greasy hands. These street meats were more than meals. They were part of the evening's entertainment. Singing, juggling, even dancing. Some vendors kept customers around longer by doubling as performers. One stall even lets you spin your own meat over their fire for a small fee. You take a turn, trying not to catch your sleeve on fire. The woman next to you is roasting frog legs. She dunks them in garlic butter between flips. You ask if she's from France. She smirks. No, she says, just hungry. You notice many of these skewers are seasoned heavily. Sigh. Salt, vinegar, and herbs cover every bite. It wasn't just for taste. Salt preserved meat, and strong spices helped mask questionable freshness. There's even a skewer labeled Yesterday's Blessing. You wisely skip it. One odd stall draws your attention. The Bone Stew Man. He sells chunks of marrow on sticks, roasted until soft and seasoned with sage. It's like medieval butter, but meatier. He lets you try a sample smeared on a piece of toasted bread. It's rich, uncomfortably so, but you lick your fingers clean. You sit down near the fire pit with a warm skewer of lamb in one hand and a small cup of cider in the other. The air is thick with wood smoke and laughter. Someone plays a slow tune on a pipe. A dog naps beside your bench, hoping for a dropped scrap. You take another bite. This might not be your healthiest decision. It might not even be your wisest. But for now, it's warm, delicious, and deeply, deeply satisfying. And isn't that the very heart of junk food? The scent of roasted meat fades as you drift into a quieter part of the village, led by flickering candlelight and the faint sound of chanting. You pass stone archways and carved wooden doors until you come upon a small, ivy-covered convent. It seems peaceful, holy even. So it's a bit of a surprise when you discover that the nuns inside have invented donuts, or something very close. A warm puff of fried dough lands in your palm, gently placed there by a smiling woman in a heavy wool habit. She doesn't speak, just nods and turns back to her bubbling pot of oil. You take a bite. It's soft, golden, and lightly dusted with sugar and cinnamon. You let out a low sigh of approval. This, it turns out, is part of their fundraising strategy. While monks were known for their cheeses and ales, nuns across Europe often made sweet pastries to support their cloisters. Some of these women became expert confectioners, producing fritters, biscuits, and yes, proto-donuts that they sold at local fairs or through discreet monastery doors. The sister next to you explains that their version of donuts is called frittella. The dough is made with flour, eggs, and a touch of rosewater, then fried until golden, and sometimes filled with spiced fig jam. You take another bite. There's a soft pop of warm, sweet filling. It's heavenly. Literally. Historians still argue whether these fried treats were a sacred invention or a secular indulgence that sneaked into cloister kitchens. Recipes survive in medieval cookbooks like the Libro de Arte Coquinaria, hinting at a long history of cloistered baking that blurs the line between piety and pleasure. You're invited into the warm kitchen, where a large pot of oil bubbles gently beside rows of cooling pastries. The nuns move with practiced grace, frying, flipping, sprinkling with sugar like they've done this 1,000 times. And they probably have. One sister shows you their spiced almond stars, deep-fried and dipped in honey. Another hands you a triangle of fried bread, soaked in orange flower water. It's subtle, aromatic, and deeply calming. You feel yourself relaxing just chewing. Apparently, this convent is famous, not just for its doughy creations, but for their special sleepy fritters. You raise an eyebrow. The sister nods solemnly. Nutmeg, she says, and a tiny bit of poppy seed. You chew slowly, suddenly very aware of your eyelids. You ask if they ever sell these to travelers. Only those who seem tired, she says, smiling. They tell you these fried treats are especially popular during feast days, when indulgence is temporarily permitted, even encouraged. They make dozens of varieties: fig cakes, herb puffs, fried milk curds with honey, and a particularly delightful thing called angel pillows. Little clouds of yeast dough filled with lemon peel and soft cheese, fried and rolled in sugar. You eat one and feel like you could float. While you chew, you notice a board scratched with names and drawings. It's a ledger of sorts, showing which sister invented which pastry. Sister Beatrix, rose almond puffs. Sister Isolde, honey vinegar donuts. You skip those. Sister Agnes, fried custard squares. You add your name beside a scribbled note. Visitor, 87. You're told some convents even sent recipes between cloisters, smuggling them in letters or along trade routes. A fried sesame and date recipe from Moorish Spain once made its way to a Belgian abbey, where it was adapted with local barley flour and honey. Globalization, medieval style. One nun hands you a fried apple ring drizzled with thick syrup. Another offers fried milk bread dipped in wine. You begin to lose track. Everything smells like cinnamon and flour and slightly burnt holiness. You step outside for a moment to cool off and realize that people are lining up at the back gate of the convent, coins in hand. They murmur about the Sisters' Circles, which turns out to be the nickname for their lemon thyme donuts. The batch sells out in minutes. Someone complains that Sister Juliana has limited each visitor to 3. Someone else tries to bribe her. She raises a ladle threateningly. Order is restored. These nuns are serious about their snack business. Back inside, one sister hands you a final treat, a fried pastry shaped like a dove with almond eyes and honey feathers. She tells you it's for St. Hildegard's Day. You're not sure who that is, but the dough is soft and the symbolism charming. By now, you're full in a different way, not just fed, but warmed. These weren't just snacks. They were hospitality, care, quiet joy wrapped in golden batter. The last thing you see as you leave is a tray cooling on the windowsill. Each dough ring is perfect, lightly sugared, steaming in the cool night air. You take one last sniff before heading back into the darkened street. Behind you, the soft clang of a ladle and the low hum of nuns singing fades gently into silence. The path leads you down from the quiet grace of the convent into a winding, muddy lane where the air smells less like holiness and more like mischief. Children dart between carts, their laughter sharp as wind chimes, their pockets suspiciously full. And what's that in their hands? Pastries, nuts, odd little pouches made from dried fruit skins. You've stumbled into the world of medieval childhood cravings, and these kids are snack savvy, make no mistake. One small boy is gnawing on a hunk of honeycomb wrapped in a cabbage leaf. He grins at you, face sticky, teeth missing. His friend offers you a fig sling, not a weapon, but a strip of flattened fig paste rolled around crushed hazelnuts. You accept it. It's chewy, earthy, and just sweet enough to make you understand why some children risked a good whack to sneak one from the market stalls. Unlike their noble peers, peasant children rarely had toys, but they had treats, especially if they could steal, beg, or charm their way into them. You watch as two girls trade a candied almond for what looks like a vinegar-soaked berry wrapped in cloth. They squeal, giggle, and pop their winnings in their mouths with theatrical delight. For wealthier children, snacks were sometimes more elaborate. One noble boy shows off a pocket pie, a small hand-sized pastry filled with fruit and spiced with cinnamon. He says his cook makes them fresh every morning. You ask for a bite. He declines and gallops off on a hobby horse that probably cost more than your hypothetical medieval house. Still, sweet treats weren't exclusive to the elite. Even village kids found ways to snack, roasting chestnuts over tiny fires, toasting oats with honey, or sneaking pinches of sugar from apothecary shelves when no one was watching. One girl proudly shows you her stash, 2 candied fennel seeds and a walnut half-dipped in syrup. She keeps them wrapped in a biais. It's of cloth tied around her waist like treasure. Historians still debate how often children in medieval times had access to sweets. Records are sparse, and many foods we'd consider treats today were seen as medicinal or adult only. But illustrations in manuscripts show little hands reaching for pies and biscuits, so either way, children tried. You walk past a group playing bochette with small, hard sweets, like marbles, only edible. Some are round pieces of hardened honey candy, others look suspiciously like dried peas covered in sugar. The game ends with everyone eating the winners, which feels both wholesome and vaguely cutthroat. A tall boy offers you something he calls a sugar nut. It's not a nut at all, just roasted barley dipped in honey and rolled in ash for preservation. It crunches like gravel but tastes like molasses and burnt toast. You nod politely. He beams like he invented it. You come to a courtyard where a group of children are clustered around a woman selling apple moons, thin slices of dried apple, dipped in syrup and strung onto little threads. The kids wear them like necklaces and nibble them through the afternoon. One girl solemnly gives you a string. You put it on. She approves. Nearby, a gang of small boys hide behind a stack of hay bales. You peek over and catch them daring each other to eat noble scraps, the leftovers they've scavenged from the back door of the manor kitchen. A slightly stale jam tart, a bruised pear, a crust with a smear of soft cheese. One boy lifts a wedge of wine cake, a slice of bread soaked in spiced wine and roasted till crisp. You try it. It's dry, intense, and oddly compelling. You don't ask how long it's been sitting out. One child you meet is the baker's daughter. She has dough under her fingernails and flour on her nose. She sneaks you a still warm crumb bun made from leftover dough rolled with raisins and honey. Papa makes them only when no one's watching, she says. You bite in. The texture is rough, the sweetness mellow. It's a secret worth keeping. There's something heartwarming in how these kids interact with food, not as something to be plated or portioned, but as a small adventure. They chase roasted chickpeas like coins. They barter honey for clover flowers. They chew on licorice root sticks and dream of candied apples at the next fair. One boy boasts that he once ate 7 fig balls in one sitting and didn't vomit. The others look on with awe. The day dims. Parents begin calling from doorways. Children scatter like pigeons. A few drop sweets as they run, scooped up moments later by faster, sneakier hands. A small girl presses a sugared nut into your palm before disappearing behind a fence. You look down at the offering, still warm. In the world of medieval kids, junk food wasn't just pleasure, it was power. It meant comfort, trade, mischief, reward. A way to carve sweetness from a world that didn't always offer it freely. You pop the sugared nut in your mouth and smile. You're just beginning to digest the goodwill of that sugared nut when the sharp clang of a bell cuts through the dusk air. Not a church bell, no, this one is smaller, harsher, and followed by a voice that rings like cold iron. By order of the bailiff, let it be known, the pie thief has been caught. You instinctively check your pockets. Not because you're guilty, well, not very, but because in medieval towns, snack crimes were taken very seriously. You shuffle forward with the small crowd gathering around a makeshift wooden platform. On it stands a sheepish-looking man, flour on his tunic and blackberry jam on his chin. His hands are tied, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and smug pride. A stolen tart, someone whispers. A very fine one, with imported saffron and candied orange peel. Worth a whole day's wages. The punishment? Stocks. Right in the middle of the market. For 3 hours, with the tart still stuck to his tunic as evidence. You watch as a child walks up, sniffs the jam, and giggles before skipping away. In the Middle Ages, petty theft wasn't taken lightly, especially if the stolen item involved food. The logic was simple. If everyone starts snatching pies and sugar figs, what happens to social order? Chaos. Hunger. Jam everywhere. You pass a wall covered in crude sketches, public notices warning against adulterated honey and dishonest vendors. Apparently, one merchant had been caught selling cakes made with ground beans instead of flour. Another had been flogged for dyeing his fritters with crushed beetles to make them look richer. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about protecting health or just flexing authority. Either way, you're now very aware of your own sticky fingers. You pause at a baker's stall, where he's being quietly interrogated by 2 town officials. The charge? Deceptive crusts. Supposedly, he'd been selling pies with little meat and lots of breadcrumbs. You try a sample. It's convincing. But yes, mostly bread. You nod sympathetically and back away. Snack-related crimes weren't limited to vendors. There were laws about portion sizes, ingredients, even how loudly you could advertise your wares. In some towns, if you sold a pie with spoiled meat, even unknowingly, you could be fined or publicly humiliated. If the offense was repeated, you might be banned from baking altogether. And if you were a child caught stealing sugar or honey, a whipping. Or, for first-time offenders, a week in church penance. Not exactly light-hearted mischief. You pass another man being scolded for false pastry. Apparently, he filled his pies with mashed peas and told customers it was pigeon. When caught, he defended himself by saying, "Pigeons eat peas, don't they?" The magistrate was not amused. Still, some snack crimes were more subtle, like the old woman who secretly reused pie crusts, or the young lad who scraped sugar off pastries to resell separately. Resourceful, yes. Legal? Not so much. One particularly infamous case involves hollow fritters, pastries that appeared full from the outside but were empty inside. The culprit, a clever widow with a bent for profit, claimed divine inspiration. The Lord filled them with spirit, she said. The judge was less inspired. There's even talk of a secret society of snack smugglers, men and women who trafficked in black market sugar, illicit spices, and bootlegged marzipan. They met in candlelit basements and whispered in pastry code. A rooster's tongue meant almond tart. A candle drop was a fig preserve. No one knows if this is true, but the idea alone makes your inner detective very hungry. A few stalls over, you witness a more modern approach to justice. A baker who was fined, but then won his case by baking the magistrate a pie shaped like the town crest. Apparently, good crusts heal many wounds. You sit on a bench now, quietly nibbling a licorice stick shaped like a twisty root, watching as the man in the stocks finally gets untied. He stretches his arms, takes a bow, and walks off proudly, trailing jam. The crowd disperses. The air cools. And you begin to understand something strange and beautiful. Even in a world where food could land you in prison, or at least public ridicule, People still risked it for the chance to taste something sweet, something forbidden, something fried and perfect and fleeting. You think about the pie thief. Was it worth it? You glance down at your own slightly stolen marzipan flour hidden in your cloak. Yes, yes it was. The stars are sharp above now, pricking the velvet sky like silver pins. You walk slowly, hips a little heavier, steps a bit more uncertain, either from the fried custard or the ale-glazed puff pastry still lodged somewhere in your gut. The streets are quieter now. Less laughter, more creaking shutters, fading torchlight. And then, you hear a door click. A low wooden creak. A whisper. You've found the monastery's pantry door. You weren't exactly invited, but the heavy aroma of dried figs, toasted barley, and something suspiciously nutty has drawn you to this quiet stone corridor tucked behind the Abbey Gardens. And you're not alone. A slim figure in a scratchy robe dashes past you and disappears through the door with the confidence of someone who has done this many, many times. Midnight Munchies, Monastic Edition. You ease the door open. Inside, candlelight flickers along shelves of dried herbs, pickled vegetables, wheels of cheese, and wax-sealed jugs of mead. And in the middle of it all, a group of monks in half-unraveled robes, crouched around a small table, slicing a loaf of honeyed barley bread with the care of surgeons. They freeze when they see you. You raise your hands in peace. One monk nods. "Hungry?" he asks. You nod back. A slice appears in your palm. Monasteries had strict food rules, especially at night. Meals were scheduled, portions weighed, silence often enforced. But that never stopped a few rebellious monks from sneaking a midnight treat. After all, prayer takes energy. And chanting all day? That'll wear a man down. You sit quietly as they pass around slices of sweet bread and soft cheese sprinkled with crushed walnuts. The older monk beside you offers a handful of sleep figs, dried and soaked in watered wine, soft as velvet. You chew slowly, letting the sugars work their magic. One novice sneaks to a corner and returns with a small wheel of goat cheese wrapped in lavender leaves. "Don't tell the abbot," he whispers. You grin and tuck in. Historians still argue how often monks broke the rules. Some say most followed the rule of Saint Benedict to the letter, eating modestly, sleeping little, and refraining from indulgence. Others believe nighttime nibbling was so common it became traditio, and especially in the colder regions, where hunger gnawed harder than guilt. You glance at the shelves, ceramic jars labeled in Latin, containing jams, syrups, even honeyed nuts for fasting days. One jar reads, Servicia Dulcis, sweet beer. You raise an eyebrow. A younger monk shrugs. For digestion. Another hands you a wafer of pressed almond paste. You bite in. It's rich, dense, and exactly the kind of sin the rule probably didn't have a clause for. A gift from the convent down the road, someone murmurs. You smile, remembering Sister Juliana's sugar circles. The monks talk softly about their favorite stolen snacks. One swears by cinnamon-dusted cheese curds. Another prefers pickled plums dipped in honey. A third dreams about the rare Abbott's fruitcake, baked only once a year, loaded with imported dates, almond flour, and, legend has it, a single gold coin baked inside. If you find the coin, you get to choose dinner the next feast day. No one's seen it in years. You sip warm milk steeped with mint. It soothes you in slow waves. One of the older monks begins to hum, and the others follow. Not a hymn, something lighter, looser, almost like a lullaby. Their heads bow, and their fingers break bread. The moment feels holy, or at least deeply comforting. You spot a small book near the pantry door, a ledger perhaps. You open it and find notes written in elegant Latin and messy shorthand. 2 pots of honey missing. Fig wine half gone again. Check Brother Martin's sleeve. Apparently, not everyone's subtle. As the candle burns low, the monks begin to retreat to their chambers. One presses a pouch into your hand. For later, he says. Inside, candied chestnuts and a wedge of dried apple rolled in rosemary sugar. You linger a moment longer, the warmth of the room still clinging to your skin. The pantry door clicks shut behind you, and the night air greets you with its chill. You walk away slowly, pouch in hand, ears full of sleepy hut, emming, belly full of forbidden cheese. Somewhere in the distance, the bell tower strikes midnight, and you can't help but think, if heaven smells like warm bread and honeyed figs, then maybe monks had the right idea all along. The stars wheel lazily overhead now, as though even the sky is growing drowsy. You pass under a stone arch draped in ivy, following the faintest scent of smoke and roasted grain. The path leads you toward the village square again, only this time, the stillness has given way to revelry. A feast day, of course, you forgot. You round a corner and find the square glowing with torches, long tables stacked with bowls and baskets, and people of all classes laughing, eating, and, most crucially, overindulging. Children run in wild circles with sticky hands. Someone plays a lute off-key. Someone else is already asleep in a hay cart with a bit of cheese balanced on their chest. Welcome to the cheat day of the medieval calendar. Feast days were sprinkled liberally throughout the year. Saint days, harvest festivals, weddings, coronations, or just a bishop's excuse for some roast goose. And while most medieval folk lived on modest rations, gruel, bread, dried legumes, for the majority of the year, feast days flipped the rules on their heads. You're handed a slab of something that smells like apples and mystery. It's a cider-glazed pork pie, heavy with cloves and thick with raisins. You chew, and your brain goes quiet for a moment. Bliss. The man who gave it to you is already moving down the table, waving a ladle of gravy like a holy relic. People are singing, dogs are stealing things. A lady in a veil is trying to balance an entire roast duck on one trencher of bread. Feast food isn't just rich, it's excessive. Deep-fried livers wrapped in pastry, sweetmeats skewered with candied orange peel, almond milk tarts, rye cakes soaked in spiced wine, and then, woes. Hen your belt screams for mercy. Out come the sweets. One table offers a feast tower, a cake structure layered with rose petal jam and almond custard, decorated with sugared violets and topped with something that might be a caramelized frog. You blink, you bite, you are not disappointed. Across from you, a man dressed as St. Lawrence, complete with fake grill marks, passes out fried oat balls soaked in honey and mead. These ones won't send you to confession, he assures you. You don't entirely believe him. Historians still argue whether most people truly feasted or simply received larger portions. It's true that peasants' feast days weren't the same as noble banquets, but even the humblest village pulled out all the stops when the calendar gave them reason. Communal ovens worked overtime, pigs were roasted whole, baked apples rolled out by the dozen, and sometimes, when the stars aligned, there was cheese and meat and something sweet, all in one sitting. You sit beside an older woman peeling roasted hazelnuts with surprisingly nimble fingers. She pops one in your mouth before you can ask, then another, then offers you a bowl of what she calls pudding of patience, a slow-cooked blend of grains, sweet wine, dates, and milk. You eat slowly, you understand the name. Another vendor passes with saint cakes, molded in the shapes of doves, bells, and rather unfortunate angels. One is flavored with nutmeg and lavender. Another is stuffed with brandy-soaked cherries. A small boy bites into a wing and promptly sits down, overwhelmed by sugar. You find a barrel with toasted oat clusters floating in a bath of warm milk and honey. Breakfast for sinners, a man declares proudly. You try a spoonful. It tastes like cinnamon, wood smoke, and faint regret. Someone hands you a glory pie, which turns out to be a double-crusted pastry filled with eggs, sweet herbs, cheese, and, surprisingly, sliced grapes. You're skeptical, then you are impressed. Then you're reaching for another slice. At one end of the square, musicians strike up a song about St. Bridget's stolen pudding. Two young women dance with baked pears in hand. A donkey steals a bite and is promptly forgiven. It's that kind of night. Feast days weren't just about the food, they were about letting go. In a world of rules and fasts, penance and silence, this was the brief moment where noise, sugar, fat, and laughter were allowed to run wild. You could sing, you could overeat, you could nap in the grass with 3 fritters in your lap and no one would judge you. Some feast-goers look a little worse for wear. One man is lying beneath the table, eating what may or may not be a pickled turnip from his shoe. Another is playing a breadstick like a flute. You decide to pace yourself. The night wears on. More platters arrive. Sweet rice balls fried in goose fat, apple slices stewed in cider, cheese pies with cinnamon crusts. Someone brings out candied fennel seeds served in paper cones. You try one, and the anise flavor wakes you up just enough to keep going. The revelers begin to fade into singing, then mumbling, then snoring. You find a haystack to lean on, sipping a warm drink made from milk, honey, and a little ale. A woman nearby murmurs that it's called the quiet cup. You believe her. It's like liquid sleep. And as you sit there, belly full and fingers sticky, you realize you've experienced something precious, the medieval cheat day. A brief rebellion against scarcity, against rules, a celebration of sweetness. One final tart, pear and sage, finds its way into your hand. You chew slowly, letting it dissolve across your tongue, soft and spiced and fading like a hymn into the night. Somehow, you're still awake. Not exactly energetic, more like drifting gently in a dream where everything tastes faintly of cinnamon and warm butter. Tea. The feast has wound down, the fires are burning low, and the remaining revelers have traded dancing for digestion. That's when you hear it. A sing-song voice, lilting over the quiet square. Hot plum cakes, sweet and round, still warm from the fire, penny a pound. You turn to see a wiry woman in layered skirts and a hat made entirely of feathers. She's carrying a tray strapped to her shoulders, stacked high with steaming treats. And she's not alone. 3 or 4 other vendors are wandering through the sleepy crowd, hawking their late-night snacks in rhyme. 3 for a farthing, fried and bold, filled with apples, dipped in gold. Not literal gold, of course. Probably saffron, or turmeric, or maybe something less identifiable, considering her apron is spattered with everything. You follow them through the square as they chant their wares. One man sells moon fritters, his voice rising and falling like a lullaby. Another has a bell that jingles each time he finishes his verse. His specialty? Roasted chestnuts dipped in vinegar and honey, served in curled bark. Food selling in verse wasn't unusual in the Middle Ages, especially in cities. Vendors used rhymes and songs to catch attention and to distinguish their goods from others. It wasn't just marketing, it was theater. And in a world without TikTok, this was about as viral as it got. You watch a woman in a red kerchief sing a rhyme about sleep pies, which she says help calm the nerves. You buy one and find it filled with mashed pear, soft cheese, and poppy seeds. You chew. She winks. Best taken with no questions, she says. Another man is reciting what sounds like a love poem, only to reveal at the end that he's selling fried leeks dipped in sugar glaze. You laugh before you even taste one, and then keep laughing because it's actually really good. Historians still argue whether these rhyming vendors composed their own verses or borrowed from a pool of known jingles. Some scholars believe popular rhymes traveled across lost towns, changing slightly with each new voice, like edible folk songs. One popular vendor is dressed like a monk, though you suspect it's theater. His chant is more sermon than rhyme, but his rhubarb tarts are drawing a crowd. 1 bite, and your sins will rise like bread, he calls. You take 2, just in case. You pause beside an old man reciting a string of nonsense words before shouting, "Almond snowballs!" He sells what look like lumps of crushed almond, sugar, and breadcrumbs rolled into sticky spheres. You buy one. It tastes like dessert, and the feeling of remembering something from childhood you never quite lived. Kids gather around a woman who sells singing apples, baked apples on sticks, scored in such a way that steam whistles softly as they cool. She hums along with them and tells children to make a wish before the sound fades. You join a small knot of people huddled around a man playing a fiddle while his wife hands out saffron buns. They recite a chant together. Warm and golden, soft and round, eat with care, don't drop the crown. Apparently, one bun contains a single almond hidden inside. Whoever bites into it is crowned Drowsy Lord or Lady of Sleep for the night. A nearby girl shrieks with joy as she finds it in her second bun. She's immediately handed a wreath of ivy and begins directing everyone to sit down and breathe slowly. You comply. This kind of gentle carnival, quiet and delicious, blurs the line between food and lullaby. The vendors move through the square like bedtime spirits, their voices fading behind you like soft winds through parchment. You bite into a spiced milk bun sold by a man who speaks only in couplets. It's filled with crushed dates, dusted with rose sugar, and wrapped in a fig leaf. It might be the most poetic thing you've ever eaten. Not every rhyme is elegant. One man shouts, "Buy my fritters, hot and sweet. Drop one and I'll tickle your feet." People laugh, but the fritters are still purchased. Greasy, sticky, and filled with quince. You eat two, another vendor's jingle is entirely off-key, and yet somehow comforting. She sings about grief tarts made with honey and sage to bring peace to the belly and hush to the heart. You take one. It crumbles in your mouth, slightly bitter, then warm with sweetness. A few of the chants reference old stories. One seller offers Robin Hood's crumbs, small squares of honeyed oats wrapped in cloth. Another calls his product witch's pillows, which turn out to be small fried pastries stuffed with almond paste and pear. He says if you eat one and don't dream, you get your penny back. You don't test the policy. Eventually, the voices begin to quiet. One by one, the rhyming vendors disappear into the night. A final verse echoes behind you. No more sweets, no more pie. Time to sleep and not ask why. You smile, your arms heavier with little wrappings, your pockets full of forgotten pastries. The sky above is pale silver now. Morning is creeping over the rooftops. But before the sun can ruin the spell, you chew one last grief tart, soft and fragrant, and walk slowly back into the soft dark. As dawn threatens to peel the stars from the sky, your feet find a slower rhythm along the river road. You pass under low stone arches and flowering hedges, the occasional rooster half-heartedly attempting a crow. It should be over by now, this night of sweets and songs and sausages on sticks. But then a new scent twists through the morning air. Something foreign. Sweet, citrusy, warm with spice. A scent that doesn't quite belong to this region, or even this continent. You follow it like a thread through the winding streets until you arrive at a modest wooden booth nestled at the edge of the marketplace. There, beneath a canopy of faded silk, a man in a turban stirs a pot of bubbling syrup. His accent is soft and rhythmic, his hands swift and practiced. He offers you a taste. Wah. And he calls natif, a sticky golden candy made of sugar, rosewater, and crushed sesame seeds. You take a bite. It's complex, sweet, yes, but layered with flavors you can't name. Almond, orange blossom, something floral, something ancient. It melts across your tongue like the memory of a dream. Welcome to the Moorish Corner. Thanks to centuries of cultural mingling, via trade, conquest, migration, or all three, medieval Europe's palate was far from homogeneous. Especially in cities along the Mediterranean, flavors flowed across borders faster than armies. You sample another treat, this one from a vendor speaking Andalusi-accented Spanish. He offers alaju, a dense, chewy bar made from honey, nuts, breadcrumbs, and spices, all pressed between thin wafers. A traveler's delight, he says with a wink. You chew thoughtfully. It tastes like a fruitcake, and a protein bar fell in love during a pilgrimage. Historians still debate how much influence Moorish cuisine had on European street food. Some claim it was transformational. while others say it remained a luxury reserved for courtly banquets. But the food itself? It doesn't argue. It's here. It's glorious. You sip a warm drink made of almond milk, cinnamon, and orange zest. Sharbat, the vendor calls it. He hands you a small pastry filled with ground chickpeas and honey. You're skeptical, until the first bite. Somehow it works. Earthy, sweet, and utterly new. Other vendors begin setting up stalls around the Moorish stand. You see a man from the Levant offering halwa rolled in pistachio dust, a woman from the Maghreb selling honey-drenched date rolls spiced with anise, a child with a tray of sticky sesame spirals, selling them for 2 copper coins or 1 song. You sing a verse of Frère Jacques. He shrugs and hands you a spiral anyway. There's also a stall marked only with a sun symbol. The cook behind it is hammering sauce-sobeshi, something into shape. Turns out to be sugar sculpted into delicate fans and feathers, flavored with saffron and cardamom. She hands you one. From Baghdad, she says softly. You take a bite. The sugar shatters delicately, then melts. It tastes like golden fire. These flavors weren't just delicious, they were also status symbols. The spices alone, saffron, nutmeg, cinnamon, cardamom, were precious imports. A single pinch could cost more than a laborer's daily wage. And yet here they are, being folded into fritters, drizzled over cakes, blended into jams. You pause beside a cart covered in small amber-colored blocks. The vendor explains they're preserved citrus peels from Sicily, simmered in honey and spiced wine. For noblemen and poets, he adds with a theatrical bow. You take a piece. It bites back gently, then dissolves into bright, fragrant sweetness. Not every treat is polished. Some are humble, flatbreads dipped in honey, sesame crackers with cumin, crushed fig patties rolled in flour. But each one carries a story, a path traced across sea and sand. You hear someone murmur about the sugar roads, routes that carried cane from the Middle East through Sicily, across the Mediterranean, and deep into the stomachs of Europe. Trade brought more than spices. It brought sweets. It brought technique. It brought dreams of new flavors to sleepy towns where the most exotic ingredient used to be dill. A Moroccan traveler nearby tells you he's headed north next week, carrying barrels of preserved lemon peel and cinnamon wine jelly to Bruges. They'll complain it's too sweet, he says with a grin, and then buy all of it. You nod. That sounds about right. As the market brightens with morning light, the Moorish corner begins to pack away. You thank the vendor who gave you the natif. He presses one last piece into your hand and says, "For the road, and the dreams after." You place it gently in your pouch, and walk away tasting spice, sugar, and the slow blending of worlds. By now, your pouch jingles faintly with crumbs, nuts, and a suspiciously sticky feather-shaped sugar shard. Your tongue has gone on a journey worthy of a bard's song. But just when you think you've tasted everything this medieval night has to offer, you turn a corner and stop. Because what's that? It looks like a sausage. But sweet, maybe? There's a floral scent, possibly nutty, maybe meaty? Welcome to the part of the menu historians rarely agree on. Was that even food? You approach the stall slowly. The vendor, a woman with a face like she's seen too many winters and survived every one, gestures at her table proudly. Almond sausage, she says. Dried, spiced, sweet. Good for teeth, better for memory. You stare at the pale cylinder wrapped in linen and dusted with flour. It looks like something that might be a prank. You slice a bit off. It's chewy, sticky, not bad, not good, but definitely edible. This is where medieval snacking gets strange. You're not in the land of pies and fritters anymore. You've entered the culinary uncanny valley where everything kind of looks like food, probably was intended as food, and may have been enjoyed by someone with fewer teeth and lower expectations. One man sells goose fat candy, essentially bread cubes fried in goose drippings, rolled in sugar and herbs. For strength, he says. You try one. It's oily, salty, then sweet. You make a face. He beams. Another stand offers milk glass. That is, boiled down milk and sugar left to cool into a translucent slab that wobbles and snaps. It looks like something alchemists would bottle. You try a corner. It's brittle, bland, and surprisingly soothing. Nearby, a stall advertises ash cakes. You ask if they're literal. The vendor grins. Baked in ash, he says. Keeps them warm, adds flavor. You nod like that clears anything up. The cake is dense, dark, vaguely nutty. You chew slowly and decide it's not half bad, though your brain refuses to fully commit. Historians still argue whether these foods were culinary accidents, deliberate creations, or resourceful desperation. In times of famine or Lent, people got creative. That meant making sweets from crushed beans, cakes from dried turnips, honey from boiled carrots. Some of it was quite good. Some of it was legendary for all the wrong reasons. You stumble upon a pot of something bubbling. A spoon dips in and pulls out a cube. Wine jelly, someone offers. You try it. It's alcoholic, wobbly, slightly sour. It sticks to your teeth like betrayal. Next up, bread beer bites. Not exactly beer, not quite bread, more like fermented dough balls rolled in stale breadcrumbs and baked until brown. You try one. It puffs slightly when bitten and tastes like a monk's confession. Then there's the date fish. You stop. The vendor insists it's made entirely of dates, shaped to look like fish, even glazed with herbs to resemble scales. It is disturbingly lifelike. You close your eyes and take a bite. Sweet, chewy. Thankfully not fishy. Still weird. A group of children nearby are chewing on sticks. Licorice root, the vendor explains. Good for the teeth, or so the herbalists say. You suck on one. It tastes like sweet dirt and pepper. Not your favorite, but oddly relaxing. You pause beside a cauldron of oat glue. It's more porridge than snack, but the vendor swears it's a beloved treat in his village. We eat it cold, with vinegar. You raise your eyebrows. He offers a spoonful. You take it. It clings to your soul. Another stand sells rose gravel, bits of crystallized rose petals stuck to small pebbles of rock sugar. Pretty, crunchy, strangely floral. You nibble one and get a whiff of old perfume and bee wings. There's flourless fried shadows, a doughless fritter made entirely from egg whites, spiced wine, and something he won't name. It's soft and steams like an enchanted toadstool. You eat one with quiet awe. By now, your tongue has lost its compass. Sweet, savory, edible, ceremonial, you're not sure. But every bite feels like a puzzle piece from someone else's dream. Finally, you meet a man in an apron covered in chalk dust. Sugar bricks, he says. Not for chewing, just for licking. You oblige. The surface is hard and sandy, but the sweetness hums slowly across your tongue. It tastes like the patience of 1,000 bakers. As you lean against a pillar to recover, a woman passes with a tray of round, grayish sweets. Ash and honey pebbles, she whispers. From a monk's vision. You take one without asking further. In the world of medieval snacking, the line between dessert and dare was blurry. But people made what they had, shaped it into whatever form pleased them, and called it nourishment. And sometimes, it was. You tuck away a bit of almond sausage and a pebble of rose gravel. Not because they were your favorite, but because they were the strangest. And that, somehow, feels like a victory. The sky has begun to blush. A thin ribbon of pink light curling behind the rooftops like the final stroke of an illuminated manuscript. A soft breeze rattles the bones of old wooden shutters. Somewhere nearby, a baker is stoking his oven for the day's first loaves. And you, dear wanderer, are rounding the final corner of this long, strange, delicious night. You think you've seen it all. You've eaten fried cheese from nuns, drunk warm spiced milk with monks, and tasted candies that might have doubled as perfumes. But just before you reach the edge of the square, you hear a curious bit of gossip floating between two women hunched over a stall of bruised pears. "Served him a poisoned tart, they say," one whispers. "Apricots and almonds, soaked in too much delight." The other nods, eyes wide. "Brought down a king, that tart did." Now, that gets your attention. You lean in, and soon the story unravels. The tale of a monarch who fell not by blade or battle, but by bite. Not from an assassin's dagger, but a sugared delicacy gone wrong. Historians still argue about the death of King Henry of Navarre. Some say it was foul play, others claim food poisoning. One legend suggests a candied fruit tart, thick with almond paste and possibly laced with bitter kernels, sent him to an early grave. Sweetness turned sinister. You pass a cart covered in faded gold cloth. A man in fine robes leans against it, slicing a tart into perfect slivers. "Apricot and almond," he offers with a sly smile. "Fit for a king, or a downfall." You pause. You take one. The pastry is perfect, warm, buttery, rich with fruit, a hint of marzipan. Nothing dangerous, you think. Food has always been power. In courts across medieval Europe, cooks were just as political as scribes. A tart offered to a rival could be a gesture of peace, or an untraceable threat. Almonds, in particular, were tricky. Sweet almonds delighted. Bitter ones contained cyanide. And if you weren't careful with your paste, well, let's just say kings paid their tasters handsomely. Not all deaths by snack were royal. One nobleman, legend says, choked on a honey cake during a joust intermission. Another fell into a stew pot during a feast. No one noticed until dessert. Then there's the tale of the knight who ate so many fried curds soaked in wine that he simply lay down and never stood up again. You sip a honeyed cordial and wonder which snacks from tonight would be your undoing. The almond sausage, perhaps? That goose fat candy? The eel fritter? Or maybe, just maybe, it would be something softer, something gentler. A tart so perfect, so seductively sweet, you never even saw it coming. The vendor offers you a second slice. You decline with the dignity of someone who survived a dozen Rickel desserts. You walk on, the story of the royal tart lingering like powdered sugar on your tongue. The market begins to shift now. Vendors sweep their stalls, ashes are shoveled, unfinished pastries are wrapped in cloth and tucked into pockets. Children snore against benches, crusted in syrup and dreams. A dog licks the last crumbs from the street. You pass by Sister Juliana again. She nods without a word and hands you one final sugar ring. No rhyme, no pitch. Just a quiet farewell. The last bite is slow, soft, and not entirely real. You're no longer hungry. Not really. What you are is full. In that curious, aching way that happens only after something truly rare. Not just a meal, a memory. A journey made of sugar, spice, bread, meat, and mischief. The sky opens its arms to the sun. And now, slowly, we ease you down into rest. Wind down. Final 300 words. You settle into stillness now. The noises of the night fade behind you. No more jingling bells, no more rhyming fritter vendors, no more clanging pans or whispers of almond assassins. Just the soft hush of a waking town and the fullness that sits gently in your belly like a candle glowing from the inside. Breathe in and let it go. You've traveled so far tonight, through alleyways of frying oil and honey, across carts stacked with mystery snacks, into kitchens sacred and silly, where monks and nuns whispered secrets over syrup. You've walked with children chewing fig slings, watched pie thieves face the public stocks, and learned that even the quietest foods carry stories, sometimes holy, sometimes treacherous, always human. Let it all melt now, like sugar on your tongue. The smell of almonds, the warmth of spice, the quiet bubbling of a pot in the dark. Let them blur into softness. No need to remember each bite, just the feeling, the hush, the warmth. With every breath, your body sinks deeper into rest. The roads are quiet now. The torches have gone out. The feast is over. But the sweetness remains, humming softly in your limbs like a lullaby in a language you almost forgot you knew. Let your hands grow heavy. Let your breath slow. And if your dreams bring you back to a glowing stall lit by candlelight, buy the tart. Always buy the tart. Sleep well.